Hello, everyone. I'm Peta, for those of you who don't know me. I'm on the marketing team, and I'm also known sort of as the patient story junkie on our team. And I'm excited to bring another patient story to you. Certainly fits in with the theme of this conference. And from what we heard from so many of you on, I think it was Tuesday, in telling the ARUP story, the patient stories so inspire and motivate us to do what we do and to do it well. And so today our guest is going to share her story, and she is sort of for the first time sharing it from a very personal place, a very personal perspective, which takes courage. She has shared it with Grand Rounds in a sort of very medical perspective, much more sterile than what she's going to be sharing today, but please send her encouraging vibes. She's a wonderful woman, and she's going to share it from the perspective, her story from the perspective of a mother and an advocate for other families that are walking in the same shoes that she has walked. And so if you will welcome Heidi Wallis, please do.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here and listening to my family's story. It's an honor to be here. Many years ago, when I was 18, I met my husband, Trey, in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we married, and after several years, we decided to start our family. And in 2003, we had our adorable daughter, Samantha, and she seemed perfect. And we were first-time parents, and we enjoyed every moment of it. And she was happy and friendly and engaged, and she rolled over quickly and just seemed like the perfect baby to us. And as she grew older, she started to have some mild delays. She had rolled over quickly, but then she didn't repeat that. And when she was a year, she was just starting to crawl and not really close to walking yet. And we did talk to our pediatrician, and we were keeping an eye on it. And when she was 18 months, she started to walk. And the pediatrician said, that's just in time. If it goes past 18 months, then we worry, but 18 months is fine, don't worry about it. And he just kind of kept having those nervous mom moments, and the different more experienced moms in my life would say, calm down, I know this child that didn't talk till they were 3 and they're fine, and everything's fine, just calm down. And so we kept hanging in there and staying calm. We did start some early intervention, and we would go to little groups with other parents and sing, songs and practice different Twinkle Twinkle and whatnot. And I kept thinking and looking at the other kids, my daughter is not like this. She's fine. Like, I don't even know why we're here. But over the next couple of years, she really wasn't making progress. And she hit 3 years old, and we went in for our annual checkup, and she really wasn't speaking. She would say things like, ba was ball, or ma was mom, and ma was more. And we could kind of understand her as her parents, but really she was pretty much nonverbal. And so at that 3-year-old checkup, her pediatrician said, I want you to go and have a thorough testing. And so we went up to Primary Children's, and we did the autism testing and met with several different specialists. And at the end, they said, well, let's look at your results. Here's the spectrum. And when you score this many points, you're on the spectrum. And she had scored on the spectrum by 1 point. And it was not a relief for us. It was not the answers we'd hoped for. It was really confusing because we felt like 1 point, I mean, that's, you know, she's not in the mood, she's not engaging with you. I promise she engages more at home, and it wasn't helpful. But we decided, well, we're gonna nip this in the bud, and we're gonna work with her. And we found a local developmental group that works with your child and evaluates them and says, okay, this is your program. So you're going to do this from the moment they wake up until they go to bed, and you're going to do these activities. And some of them, it was literally 50 times a day. We would do these activities to help her develop. And we had some really long days back then. Between 3 and 5, we were doing this home program all day long, every day. And we were kind of shut in. My younger kids, they didn't get much of an outside life. We were at home working to help Sam constantly, and we did every autism fix that we could find. We did the diet, we bought a sauna and sat in there every day, and we did everything we could do. And by about 5, Sam became potty trained. She potty trained at the same time as her younger sister, who was 2.5. And then she started having these little spells where she would look up. And we talked to the developmental group, and they said, well, she's nonverbal, so this is how she processes. She can't think in words like you and I. She has to stop, and she works in images, and that's what she's doing. And so we're like, okay. And over the next 6 months, they just became more frequent. And one day she was climbing up on a stool, and she reached up to get a cup, and she fell. And we went, oh, this is not right. And if you can see in the top left picture, that's Sam having one of her thinking spells. And I quickly got one on camera and took it to the pediatrician. And he said, let's get you to neurology. And we went up to primaries, got in very quickly, and they did an EEG and easily caught an absence seizure, which is what this is, a spell of looking up or sometimes just looking forward but frozen, and she was having seizure activity. And he said, well, let's get you in for an MRI. You know, maybe there's something in there. There's a tumor, something that's causing all of this. Let's take a look at her brain. And we did that. And at some point, he had heard that with children like Sam who have severe speech delays and other delays, while you're doing an MRI, it might be a good idea to run an MRS or spectroscopy. And so on that hunch, he ordered that as well. And at the end of the testing, we actually had requested the results. We took them home and opened them up, and we saw the notes. The spectroscopy is kind of like a graph of different chemicals in the brain, and there's typical peaks and valleys, and one of the peaks that's on there is for creatine. And the notes said, absence of a creatine peak. And we're like, what? Check for possible creatine deficiency. So we got online and we started looking, and we saw that there are 3 different kinds of creatine deficiencies, and 2 of them are treatable. And all you do is you take creatine, really. And problem solved. What your body can't do, you solve by oral supplementation. And we hoped that that was it. We went back, and this is when the testing came into play. We tested blood and urine and DNA, and everything showed positive for Sam for having a disorder called GAMT Deficiency. And this was 2009, and Sam had been born in 2003, and GAMT Deficiency was discovered in 1994. So it was in its infancy. It wasn't something that pediatricians were looking for at the time. So as a mom who, a lot of parents have feelings of frustration with their doctors, like, why didn't you find this? But I do understand the difficulty back then with testing. But this spurred us towards another phase of, we're going to help Sam. This time, the results were actually the answers to our questions. It made perfect sense. We knew it wasn't autism. There's something going on in her body that's just not right. Something's off. and it made perfect sense. We started treatment, and we had a lot of hope at that time. So we started preparing creatine. This is current creatine. In the beginning, when she was 5, we didn't know what to do, and we didn't know, how to overcome that it tasted horrible and that she would choke on it and she would cry, and we would stand over her and go, drink it, drink it, drink it. We would mix it into smoothies. We would mix it into applesauce. Anything she liked, we ruined for her by putting creatine in it and saying, eat it. And finally, I figured out she liked a little Diet Coke. So I mixed it in water, and I thought, I'm going to shoot this. We're gonna slam this. And I cracked open the Diet Coke, sat on the counter, prepared as little of water as I could just so it would flow through a syringe. And I was like, you want this Diet Coke? Okay, drink this. And it worked. And it's been going strong ever since, and she doesn't get Diet Coke every day, but... So when we did get the news of her diagnosis, she actually, the same day we got confirmation, she got into a charter school for kindergarten the coming fall, and we mainstreamed her. And we thought, let's do this. Let's, have her be with typical kids and see what happens. And so she started school, and we sent home a letter to all the families when she was the superstar and said, this week's superstar is Sam. If your kids have been talking about their friend at school that doesn't talk, we want to tell you a little more about Sam. And we explained, her body has what it needs now, and we're really excited. And, if your kid is uncomfortable, tell them you can help Sam. And it went amazing. We would put little words on her back. I'd pin an index card on her back, and the kids at school would try to help her say the word, and then they would celebrate that she said the word, and it was really cool and really positive, and a good time for us. But by 3rd grade, it got hard, and she had made a lot of progress. In the first 9 months, she went from nonverbal to 3 to 5 word sentences that other people could understand. So tons of progress really quick, and then it slowed down. And in 3rd grade, she was pulled out of the mainstream class so much time in special ed, that I, again, stubborn as could be, said, well, then I'll fix her because you guys aren't doing this right. And so I homeschooled her for the next 2 years. And that was awesome, and lots of good memories, and she did lots of learning, but it was also brutal. It was again, like morning to night, Mom and Sam duking it out, like you will sit and you will learn, and so more of that conflict that is hard with a special needs kid that you just need to give your love to and learn what is your potential and how do I get you there and accept you there. And so after 2 years of doing that, we went to our 6-month checkup with Dr. Longo up at the metabolic clinic, and for whatever reason, that was a rough day for Sam. And Dr. Longo walked in, and she just had a full-on meltdown. She was yelling, she was talking gibberish, kicking her legs, and Dr. Longo tried to ignore it, and so did I, and it got louder, and finally he just looked me in the eye and said, you need to get this kid in school. She needs to see how other kids her age behave, because she's not learning from you that. And that's what she needs to learn now, is how to behave and how to grow into an adult and function. And he said, and you need to do something with your life too. She's going to be done with school at 22, and you will have, lost all those years, and she won't have learned from her peers, and then you won't have another opportunity. And so I decided to put Sam back in school. And she's been in school ever since, and she absolutely loves it. She has the sweetest peer tutors, and it's been really positive. So today, how do things look for Sam? with being diagnosed at 5.5 with GAMT deficiency. She's made huge improvements with her speech, with math, with reading. In her special ed class, she is the best reader. They had to get books off a top shelf, dust them off, that they've never used for a kid before in their class. And I'm super proud of her. But she has seizures, and they've become the convulsive, typical kind of seizures you think of. We've tried so many different medicines that have made her hair fall out, made her gain weight, made her lose weight, made her get kidney stones, and they all give mood swings and make for a really cranky kid. And you can imagine the effects on our family. It's been a lot of dancing around, is today a good day? We'll go have fun. Is today a bad day for Sam? Well, we're on lockdown. We can't go in public. We can't do the things that you other kids want to do because Sam's having a bad day. She's classified as intellectually disabled at school. She has a difficult time with her expressive speech. She still has a speech impediment from the particular seizure medicine that she took, where she had a lot of regression from that. But recently we had surgery for a VNS, which is kind of like a pacemaker for your brain. She got that at the beginning of the summer, and it can respond to seizures. It can help kind of train your brain to calm down, and it's a mood booster. And she's really turned a corner and is super happy. And she started high school, and I just this week had a parent-teacher conference, and I'm like, so does Sam have bad days and good days? Like, how's she doing? And they're like, every day's good. Like, she's so good, and she's so quiet, and she's so well behaved. Like, it was just amazing. So we are currently on a positive upswing. Well, after Sam was born, we had 2 children between when she was born and when we figured out what was going on, and we were wanting a 4th, and we kind of waited, and finally we decided, let's do it. Let's have another baby. And we know from genetics standpoint, it's a 1 in 4 chance, but we've heard that a baby should be okay treated from birth with this. And so we rolled the dice, and we had a baby boy in 2011, Louis, and we took blood immediately and ordered testing. I'm sure it went to ARUP. And waited a week, and then Dr. Longo called and said, I have bad news. Louis has GAMT. And I was pretty devastated. I was, again, in denial. It's a 1 in 4. We've had our 1, and this is our 4th child. He'll be fine. And it was a lot of guilt to look at that little baby and go, I think you're going to be okay. I made this decision for you. You should be okay. Well, let's see. But Louis is a champ, and he started taking these little creatine bottles from birth. He quickly learned the good stuff comes after the bottle. And I mean, probably 1 week to get this newborn baby to stop spitting the stuff out. It was amazing and a huge relief. We've watched him like a hawk. I actually requested early intervention. Will you come and look at my child? Will you make sure everything's okay? And he's amazing. It's been a completely different story. Identifying GAMT at birth for Louis has given him a completely normal life. He's imaginative, creative. He makes friends in a heartbeat anywhere he goes. He's in mainstream school with no sign of needing special ed. He's happy. His moods are level, and his speech and understanding is right on par. So one thing that happened also when we got our diagnosis was that Dr. Longo's genetic counselor introduced us to a family who also had a child with GAMT. And when I talked to that mom on the phone, she said, oh my goodness, I've waited 3 years to speak to another family. You have no idea. And now 10.5 years later, we are the best of friends. We vacation together. She started a nonprofit for creatine deficiencies, which I joined when Dr. Longo kicked me out of the homeschooling nest. And it's been so fulfilling to have this opportunity to go and share my story and to help other families. I've had families that have found our support group and they've fallen off of the supplements because they couldn't figure it out because it was so difficult, and we've helped them and they've gotten their child's seizures under control and just so many different ways. And this particular picture is of myself and that mom from California and Dr. Longo and Pasquali going to DC to speak out about how this screening should be happening for every single baby. And I've also gone into working at the health department in newborn screening as well. So it's the silver linings. Looking back at Sam and Louie and our experience with finding answers for a child that, you know, was not easy to find answers for, my advice for other parents is always push for testing and don't give up, and push for a different kind of test and ask for another test. And you had DNA that was looked at 5 years ago, look at it again. Just test, test, test. So the work that you all do is really important, even if you never get the opportunity to see it, and I appreciate all of your work. And so you've heard about my two GAMTers. We have a video to share with my whole family so you can get to know them as well.
We have 4 kids. Our oldest, Sam, and our youngest, Louie, have been diagnosed with GAMT deficiency.
Sam was diagnosed when she was 5.5. She'd had symptoms her whole life.
Getting to the diagnosis was not quick. Once we understood what this was and what it entailed, it all made sense. It all seemed to click.
She's 16 now.
To do it, some cover written it a while. Cover a lot. This is Sam's Swoop, my favorite horror book.
Because of Sam, when I was pregnant with Louie, there was a 1 in 4 chance that he would have GAMT deficiency also. And sure enough, he did. And we have watched him like a hawk since he was born. It's especially important to diagnose GAMT deficiency early because they're treatable with creatine. It's an oral treatment, it's inexpensive, and it's literally life-changing. We never stop worrying that he's doing okay and he's on par, but he seems to be doing great.
Oh, he is taller than me.
Taller than you.
I can't believe it.
Who, me?
Yes, you.
Could it be?
Then who?
Mom's doing the cookie job.
He was started on the supplements at birth, and he has sometimes been a little frustrated. Why do I have to do this? And I have explained to him, this makes you healthy, it makes you strong, and you need it. So I kind of keep it positive, but we explain it and he understands, and he's been really compliant. Sam has never questioned why she has to take the creatine. She's been doing the diet and taking the supplements for 10.5 years now, and isn't intellectually at a level where she questions why. It's just such a habit for her.
How does that taste, Sam?
Good.
So every 3 weeks we get out the supplements the kids need. They take creatine, ornithine, and sodium benzoate, and they're all powders that we get over the counter, and we weigh them out on a gram scale, and we weigh out 3 weeks worth of the supplements. We blend it together in a mortar and pestle so it's kind of a fine paste, and then draw it up really quickly into 4 syringes, and that's what they take in a day: morning, noon, afternoon, and evening.
The presentation of brain creatine deficiency syndrome is very non-specific. Most children are delayed in development. Many of them develop seizure, and some of them develop movement disorder. Due to the lack of specificity, they are very hard to diagnose. Many times they are diagnosed when they do brain imaging, but not by the regular brain MRI that is done when children have seizure. One needs to do a specialized study, which is called magnetic resonance spectroscopy. And then it needs to be confirmed by laboratory studies to identify the specific type of brain creatine deficiency syndrome.
Creatine deficiencies are not obvious. A lot of children, including Sam, are first diagnosed with something else like autism spectrum disorders, cerebral palsy, Angelman's. I've heard a lot of different initial misdiagnoses.
No foot and hair weed.
GAMT deficiency should be included in the newborn screening panel in all states because it's easy to do from the technical point of view. It's inexpensive and it makes a big difference in the life of patients with GAMT deficiency.
Thank you so much.
So we have two surprise guests today. Sam and Louie are here with their mother. Can you guys stand up? There's a whole lot of people here that want to meet you. So I'm going to just ask Sam a question here. Sam, how old are you?
16 years old.
And when's your birthday?
July 28th.
And one more question. Can you tell this audience, what do you love to do?
I love to do is play in iPad.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Louie some questions now. All right, Louie, how old are you?
I'm 7.
And when's your birthday?
December 14th.
Okay. Now for the hardest question of all, what do you love to do?
I don't know. I'll do my wake up.
Legos.
He loves to play with his Legos, like a lot of 7-year-old boys, right? So now I'm going to introduce two of our medical directors who can speak to this topic and Heidi's story. They've been along with her on this journey. And I know you met them in the video, but I'm going to add a little bit more. I'll just recap a bit. I know I'm not including their full titles because they've got a number of titles, but Dr. Pasquali, ARUP, she's the section chief for the Biochemical Genetics Division and a University of Utah professor of pathology. She has played an integral role in our newborn testing and worked closely with the state of Utah, Utah's newborn screening program. Among other areas, her research includes creatine metabolism and transport. And Dr. Longo is ARUP's Medical Genetics Division, is chief of ARUP's Medical Genetics Division and a professor of pediatrics. He is one of the top specialists in the world in caring for children with creatine disorders. So we are really lucky to have him here in our own backyard. Doctors Longo and Pasquali are a team in more ways than one. They are also husband and wife. And through our interactions, I've seen the depth of dedication and compassion they bring to what they do. Heidi certainly could speak to this. So if Dr. Longo and Dr. Pasquali could come up on stage, we'll go ahead and I'm going to ask them a couple questions, and then what I'm going to do is open up a Q&A to the, all of you, the whole audience. Okay, why don't you sit right here, and I'll sit in the middle. I'll sit in the middle, and then you sit right here. Thank you for joining us. So, Dr. Pasquali, I understand, thanks to all your efforts, that Utah was the first state to implement newborn screening for creatine deficiency. How many states are left yet to implement that? And what's holding them back if they haven't?
So I think that right now there are only 3 states in addition to Utah screening for GAMT deficiency. So all the others are left back, so the majority. One of the biggest problem is that the kit used for newborn screening do not include yet the marker for GAMT deficiency. So you need to use a laboratory-developed test to screen for GAMT deficiency. Several of the state laboratory do not have the resources to do that.
So, Dr. Longo, are there different types of creatine deficiency, and could you tell us a little bit about the difference between them?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you all of you for being in the audience, and thank you, Heidi, for every time teaching something new to me about what happened with this condition. And brain creatine deficiency syndrome can be caused by different molecular mechanisms. They all have in common the fact that the brain does not have a sufficient amount of creatine to do its job. In the case of GAMT deficiency, there is the aggravation that one of the chemicals that accumulate in the brain further damage the brain and can cause seizure. There are 3 types of brain creatine deficiency syndrome that we know today. 2 are defects in the synthesis of creatine, so there are enzymes that are missing that impair the synthesis of creatine in the brain and in the rest of the body. And the 3rd one is the deficiency of a transporter, so the molecule that allows creatine to enter inside the brain. It is important to know which one it is because the treatment is quite different. For example, in GAMT deficiency is really the condition in which the toxic chemical accumulates, so the therapy is directed not only at replacing creatine, but also at blocking the synthesis of the offending compound. The other 2 conditions, in one which is called AGAT deficiency, which is the deficiency of the other enzyme, we only give creatine. And the 3rd one, which is the creatine transporter deficiency, we still do not have a therapy.
Okay, Dr. Pasquali, could you tell us a little bit about the role creatine plays in the body? Like, why is it important?
So creatine helps shuttling energy from the place where the energy is produced to the place where the energy is used, basically. So without creatine, this process is not happening.
Okay, do you want to add on to that?
So many of you, some of you are in very good shape. I'm sure you're bodybuilders. So, and as you may know, many bodybuilders use creatine because it was initially isolated from the muscle. And actually back then, I do not remember when England won so many medals, they believe that part of the reason that all of the athletes on the English team, on the British team, started using creatine, so they put them ahead of everybody else. So creatine was initially isolated from the muscle, and then obviously we started learning about its function. For those of you who work in the laboratory, you remember, one of the tests that we do all the time is creatine kinase, which is really the enzyme that attaches the phosphorus group to creatine. And once it is attached there, it can be transferred from mitochondria, where actually the high energy phosphorus group is produced, to the cytoplasm, where it is utilized. Now, in the muscle, we can all see what it can do. You get strong or not strong. In the brain, what it does, it is important to maintain the electrical property of brain cell. If those are damaged, then you have a lot of problem. And that's what we are seeing. We would have expected people with creatine deficiency to have muscle problem, and they do. It's not that they don't. They really do. But the brain is really where we have problem correcting it. The brain is really is becoming the target of many new therapies, because if we can fix the brain, then it would be a big advancement for all of medicine and all of humankind.
Wow. Okay, just one more question for each of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Actually, I was wondering if you could share the story a little bit, Dr. Pasquali, about how you got the idea that this could be a newborn test. Because I know that really you were the engine behind saying, let's make this happen. And being married, maybe you had some inside information.
Well, I think the real engine was Heidi and her family, really. And I think that by talking with my husband and realizing how much GAMT deficiency is similar to other conditions that we screen already, like PKU. And realizing that there is a marker that's detectable even before the symptoms occur, and there is a therapy that can be effective, then all of this is kind of a no-brainer, right? Why don't we screen? Why don't we try to identify this marker in the blood spot very early on? So that's what we started to work with, and with the support of the R&D, the support of the university, we had a seed grant to do a pilot project. We developed and validated a newborn screening test.
That's great. And then one more question for you, Dr. Longo. So I'm guessing there's a lot of pediatricians out there that may still not pick up on the symptoms of creatine deficiency. I suspect maybe there's kids walking around out there who have been misdiagnosed. If you were speaking to a group of parents or a room full of pediatricians, what things should they be looking for?
So unfortunately, the symptoms of brain creatine deficiency are very non-specific, and children are delayed in development. Many have autistic-like features. Many have been diagnosed with autism. And unfortunately, until you don't do a brain scan, you don't find it. The reason that we actually found many of them in Utah is because in addition to the regular brain MRI, the children that came to our hospital most of the time had the additional procedure, which is called magnetic resonance spectroscopy, which try to measure the chemicals in the brain without doing a spinal tap. So what has happened in the past few years, obviously this requires 15 more minutes of the machine, so most hospitals take it out because the insurance doesn't pay for it, which obviously is very unfortunate. But that was the reason that we were able to identify so many children with this condition in Utah, because we just were doing this procedural routine. So what I do recommend to pediatricians is anytime that you have to do a brain scan, not only do the MRI, also do the magnetic resonance spectroscopy to identify children with this condition. I just want to spend a couple of words of what my wife just said. It looks very easy in her words how you do it. It's not that easy, but that's okay.
You guys could discuss that later. So I'm going to open questions up to the whole floor. I'm going to have Heidi come back up here. The three of these lovely people can answer your questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand and one of our people will come to you with a mic.
A couple of questions. Number one, how common is the condition?
We don't have firm numbers on the frequency of any of them. From the estimate, from what you can do, you can look in genetic databases like GNOMED to determine what is the frequency of carrier for this condition. From this estimate, for GAMT deficiency, the frequency is between 1 in 120,000 and 1 in 500,000, which is extremely rare. And that it is why it is very hard for a pediatrician to diagnose, because obviously it doesn't go to the top of their list. Brain creatine transporter deficiency is at least 2 to 5 times more common than GAMT deficiency. And the problem of the creatine transporter deficiency is that it is X-linked and it affects mostly males. It is one of the causes of X-linked mental retardation. And when you look at a large series of patients, it accounts for a sizable percentage of X-linked mental retardation, depending on the series, between 5 and 10%, which is quite sizable. The biggest problem with creatine transporter deficiency is that now we have a test that easily identifies children at birth with GAMT deficiency. We do not have a test to identify creatine transporter deficiency. So until we do not have a universal newborn screening for this condition to include all of them, we will not be able to provide a precise measure of the frequency.
So to convert that to live births in the US every year, that would be between 8 and 32 children born in the US every year with that disorder. So certainly screening in 50 states would be worth changing those lives. And that's really in line with a lot of newborn screening disorders that are checked for on a regular basis. It's not more rare than others.
I have a follow-up question. I want to say you're lucky that you are in Utah, then. What do we do for our other patients outside of Utah, as far as testing is concerned? Dr. Pasquali.
For a newborn screening, we have been advocating, and the Association for Creatine Deficiency has been amazing in this fight. We've been advocating to include at least a GAMT deficiency in newborn screening panel. Again, a couple of states have actually developed the test. We have helped them, and they are screening for this condition. Some of the manufacturers of the kit right now, the kit used by most laboratories, are working, trying to add the marker for GAMT deficiency to their kit, because there is more and more interest. We have not been able to have this condition included in the recommended panel yet, but the fight is not over. So we keep working for that. In terms of diagnostic test, it's just there is more and more awareness, and at the regional level, we are trying to make a pediatrician aware that there are causes of autistic behavior that can be identified by traditional tests and can have a treatment. So we are addressing from many angles.
And Dr. Pasquali, it's a blood spot test, correct?
The blood spot is for the newborn screening, but at the diagnostic level, you look at plasma and urine, and you measure guanidinoacetate, which is an intermediate in the synthesis of creatine, which accumulates in GAMT deficiency, and you measure creatine at the same time.
One question. Back here, sorry. Would genetic testing be helpful, like a whole exome test or something like that, next-gen sequencing?
So the question is whether whole exome sequencing would identify this condition. The answer is yes. And in fact, some of the patients that have been confirmed biochemically at ARUP laboratory were originally diagnosed by exome sequencing, because obviously the presentation was very non-specific. You still need biochemical confirmation. The reason is that in many cases you have what we call a VUS, a variant of unknown significance, which you can predict based on different algorithms if it is pathogenic or not, but the proof of the pudding is really doing the biochemical testing where you demonstrate if there is a change or not. The second thing that it is happening, unfortunately, unfortunately or fortunately, is that with whole genome sequencing, we are discovering the non-coding portion of the DNA. The problem is that we still have very limited capacity to understand what variation outside the coding region means. And we are finding in our genetic diseases, especially in the biochemical one, that many times the variants are outside the coding region. The advantage of biochemical testing is that you can make a diagnosis independently from the DNA testing. And that would cover, obviously, variants wherever they are located in the genome. If the variant instead is in the promoter region and we do not know what the variant does, it is very hard to attribute pathogenicity to those type of variants.
Thank you.
So sorry, just another quick reply on that. Many of the families that are finding our support group are found through genetic testing, and even not full exome, but like the developmental delay panels, the epilepsy panels, autism panels at most labs do include the creatine deficiency. And so that's something where we have a lot of parents who go, oh my gosh, my kid's symptoms are exactly like yours. And we know, so are a lot of diseases. So probably it's not GAMT, but push for testing, and at the bare minimum, if this is the most your insurance will pay for, get some good panels, and it's worked out, and a lot of parents have been a lot of children have been diagnosed that way.
So, question for Heidi. It sounds like you and Sam have spent a lot of time over the years at Primary Children's.
Yeah.
So we at ARUP, there are children's hospitals, academic children's hospitals all over the country. Many of them send their testing to us, so they're our customers. How important was it for you and Sam to have access to an academic children's hospital and physicians like Dr. Longo who work there?
Well, I think like this woman here pointed out, we got lucky. I definitely look back and go, I don't know, I get more credit than I probably deserve because I lucked into this diagnosis that we were at an academic hospital. We had a neurologist that was forward thinking and didn't care about 15 minutes of time on his machine, that he knew it was worth it, and that they were just very thorough and educated and ran all the tests. And I never once in that whole entire process heard, let me check your insurance. We're not sure what the cost is. It's never been an issue, and so I hope that answers your question.
Hi, Dr. Pasquali. Is there any effort to sort of standardize on a national level the design of the newborn screening tests? And what you mentioned was that we had to design our own internal LDT. Is that something that we could change across the different states in terms of the way that their tests are designed?
Yes, the standardization of newborn screening started really several years ago with the design of this that's called Recommended Uniform Screening Panel, or RASP. This panel of condition basically lists the condition that, because of the epidemiology, availability of testing, availability of treatment, and effectiveness of treatment. So based on all of this, all the children, all the babies in the United States should be screened for at a minimum. And all the states are implementing this recommended screen panel. Clearly, with advances in therapy, this panel is changing over the years. The process to include an additional disorder in this panel is quite long. And that's what we are trying to do, to add GAMT deficiency to the screening panel. As soon as this is added, then pretty much all the states are going to really get ready to implement this recommendation. The only thing that's really keeping us from having this disorder added is the fact that prospectively we have not identified one patient because of the fact that the condition is rare. That's the only thing that's keeping the committee who's working on this from adding this to the screen panel.
Heidi, I have to bring up the insurance thing. I apologize. Again, you're lucky. But outside of this realm, there is, I'm telling you this from experience because I am working with a mom now who is struggling with getting some testing done for her child. In your support group, do you get questions about insurance, payment, maybe charity care, anything like that in your support group? That's question number one. Do you give advice there? And number two, how integral have the genetic counselors been in helping parents navigate through the payment? This is not common, in my experience, for a clinician and an insurance company and a parent to say, this is not a problem, continue on with testing.
Yeah, we were definitely lucky, and I do hear stories a lot of people that just can't afford things, and that's where we go, well, there's these panels out there, and a lot of them have a guarantee of you'll only have to pay this much out of pocket, we'll work with your insurance, and those are through the laboratories. And so that's kind of been our best referral mechanism, because it is hard to offer a solution for the spectroscopy. My advice, if someone was really determined to do it, I would say, get your doctor involved, writing letters and all of that, but they can have blood and urine tested, which is more affordable, and test for those markers of creatine, creatinine, and guanidinoacetate. acetate. And so that's a more affordable approach. But again, like I said before, the odds really are when somebody finds us and says that, oh, the symptoms are exactly the same. I know one time someone read a GAMT blog from a gal in the UK, and she said this fits, and she got the testing, and she was right. But most of the time, it's not it, and so I usually say go for the panels because it'll cover more, and just check the quality of the panel and make sure it's covered. And As far as like us being lucky to be in Utah and ARUP and Primary Children's, a lot of times the problem with testing is they can't find a lab that will test the GAA. And so we say, well, and it's a small handful of labs that do run that test, and so we'll help them know where to go and have the test run, and ARUP's like top of our list, of course. So did I answer both of your questions? Okay.
This is for Dr. Longo. My son is an athlete, and he still takes creatine. And my wife and I, being fairly naive, felt you're going to develop kidney stones. You need to drink a lot of water. You're pulling hamstrings because of it. It's interesting. The next day, I was in my car and going to work, and turned on doctor radio on my Sirius radio, and it was about creatine. And they were saying how it has a really bad rap of people thinking it develops kidney stones and everything that we thought. But they said it's a very healthy supplement, and that in particular helps with recovery from brain injury and concussions in particular. So our son, again, he's an athlete, and he's suffered a couple of concussions. Had we known that 2 years ago, we would have put him on, but our physicians even never recommended creatine. So that's a comment there, which is exciting. I thought I'd share with everyone who might be involved with that. But they also went on to mention that I think it was Australia is doing this mass study of giving young children creatine to monitor their brain function or growth or enhancement. And I'm just wondering if you've heard of that, and maybe what your thoughts are of maybe that becoming, just kind of one of the things we do for our newborns is giving a supplement like that.
Sorry, I had to clarify the question because my hearing is not perfect. You spoke very nicely, however. I got most of it. So, would it be good to give creatine to everybody? So, first of all, the dose of creatine that you give in brain creatine deficiency syndrome are way higher of the one that you would give to the general population. Just to give you an idea, the usual recommended dose for brain creatine deficiency syndrome is 400 to 800 milligram per kilogram per day, which is a huge lot. In people who get the creatine to get big muscle or better brain, they get 20 milligram per kilogram per day, 50 milligram, might be 100 max. So basically, it is a really different dose. Would it be good to give it to everybody? It's not bad, but quite honestly, there are many things that need to be tested if we want really to put them in clinical practice. And there are many supplements like this one. The only side effect that creatine has at very high doses is that you need to give a lot of liquid to make sure that you don't form basically something in the kidney. But apart that, the creatine supplements are very safe, as they are for other supplements. Would I recommend it? I'm not taking it. but it is up to you. I mean, I don't take vitamin either. So I mean, it's I do eat. So, and I try to eat a healthy diet. So that's all I can recommend at this point. Thank you.
Heidi, this is for you a question, Heidi. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm also a molecular genetics and doing the genetic testing as part of this team. What you shared is really assurance for why we are doing here. Everybody at ARUP is really important for patients. We're making difference. Thank you. So the question for you is, for this kind of a rare genetic condition, what if we add this screening to a carrier screening or to prenatal screening? Is that going to change the patient's life or the outcome if you knew you are a carrier before you had a SAM? Is it going to make a difference?
I think it depends on the parent. So like I mentioned, I knew my chances. So I basically had carrier screening essentially. And I knew only of my friend in California whose child was still in preschool, but she was like, oh, I swear she's doing great. I promise. And that was the only newborn treated from birth child that I knew of. And so for me, we went ahead. But, you know, I think that's a really hard question to answer for other parents. I think hopefully people would feel more and more comfortable making that decision, knowing they're carriers because of Louis and other people getting earlier diagnoses and being able to show how much it's helped. And so.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we are out of time. And so, but if you have any questions that didn't get answered, I bet these three will be around for a few minutes after, and I think it's time for lunch. So if we can give our three guests a hand, that would be great.